Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And I had a few people send this to me and say, Jason, we know that you've had some engagement with Scott Herman. You've actually said some positive stuff about him in the last year again, a year or two, but this video was just really bad. Could you address it? So I went to check it out. Let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on scaling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And yeah, Scott has come into my comments before. And I'll be honest with you guys, as far as YouTube channels go, as far as good training information, good nutrition information, Scott is one of the better ones out there. He's one of the few out there that actually puts out decent information. It's not information based upon, it's only going to work if you're blasting 2 grams of gear with growth hormone, insulin, and IGF-1. Half these channels out here, the majority of them are fake natties, are putting out really, really bad training advice. Going to get you hurt, going to get you injured, only going to get you jacked if you're blasting as much gear as they are and as genetically gifted as they are. Scott's information tends to be a little bit more down to earth, tends to be more applicable. I used to pick on him. Because he taught some really fluffy, wuffy stuff when he first started. But over the years, he's improved quite a bit with what he's saying. He makes a lot more sense. He gives a lot better practical information, more good strength training stuff. But there's some problems in this video that he made. And it's not that the fundamental concepts are wrong, it's the application of them. And the problem is that he based all of it upon a really flawed concept when it comes to muscle growth. And he made this video discussing, I took notes here, discussing these 3 fundamental things he wished he had known about muscle growth. The things that stimulated. And he was like, number 1, mechanical tension, absolutely right. Number 2, metabolic fatigue. Then he goes muscle damage, number 3. The 2 and 3 are the same thing. They're the exact same thing. There is no differentiation there, Scott. He might go, what? What do you mean? A lot of you guys go, what do you mean? Muscle damage, what you guys have been taught by bros about the tearing down of the muscle fibers, that doesn't stimulate muscle growth. Muscle breakdown is mechanical cleaving of the protein bonds. In other words, it is metabolic. Metabolic fatigue happens as a result of workload. All right, metabolic fatigue happens as a result of total workload. And that's the thing. He did say the muscle damage comes from your volume. For those who don't understand what volume is your sets, reps, and your weight used. All right, it's how much tonnage did you move through a given range of motion? How much work did you make those muscles do? That's what causes the damage. That is metabolic fatigue. It is the degradation of the contractile proteins in the muscle fibers, and when they're broken down, your body breaks them down as a fuel source. Metabolic fatigue is damage to the muscle. It responds in the other direction by making them grow even larger as a response to keep them from getting damaged. In other words, it's scared that you're going to need those protein stores and contractile proteins to thicken up to avoid damage because they're getting broken down for fuel, and then they're getting potentially weak. Causes a growth direction in the other direction, causes an anabolic response as a result of that fatigue. And yeah, metabolic fatigue is an absolutely massive component, slightly more so than mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is your number 2, really. But the 2 and 3 that he had are the same thing. They're not 3 separate things here. There's 2 separate things. The issue we run into with what he's breaking down, he made a lot of good points. But he didn't understand that the driving force behind this all is volume. And he again tried to make the difference explaining between bodybuilding and powerlifting. No, that's not true. The strongest natural powerlifters who don't use drugs, have to get as big as possible. They have to get to their natural size limits. They have to elicit hypertrophy or they don't get stronger. The guys you're thinking of who are these really small guys who lift astronomical amounts of weight are usually, number 1, very short. Number 2, they're genetic freaks. They don't represent 99.9% of powerlifters. They represent a rare set of genes. Very rare. These are very gifted genetic freaks. The majority of powerlifters are going to have to maximize their muscle growth. So no, you don't differentiate between size and strength for naturals. And when you go to true drug-free bodybuilders, what you find, the strongest drug-free bodybuilders who are legitimately drug-free tend to be the biggest ones. In other words, the ones who can lift the most weight tend to be the biggest. The ones, you go over to powerlifting, you go to natural guys, the guys who have the most muscle mass tend to be able to lift the most weight. It goes both ways, guys. And strength athletes understand this is how it works. And only bodybuilders seem to be lost on this idea. We come back to that point of mechanical tension. And what he basically said is that, you know, mechanical tension, you need to be using the heaviest weight you can use on any given set for your number of reps. And there's some truth to that. There's absolutely some truth to that, because mechanical tension is, for all purposes, the only variable you can control in mechanical tension is the weight on the bar. Otherwise, you've got to find a way to move the weight further and put yourself in a disadvantaged position. Well, if you're bench pressing, you can only go to the top and you have to stop at your chest. Okay, you don't have any other choice. Full range of motion bench press. All you can do to increase tension is put weight on the bar. Or maybe bring your hands in a hair. Slightly narrower grip. So the bar is really your primary control, the amount of weight you're using. Well, he went on to say, though, that, you know, you should be grinding out, to use bad form on that last rep, that's mechanical tension if you have to cheat a little bit. No, that's not mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is what occurred with the others. If you're cheating to lift the weight another rep, you've just reduced mechanical tension. In other words, on a bench press, your greatest mechanical tension is when you come down, come to a stop, and press. If you bounce it off your chest to get the last rep, or you shift under the bar to help cheat it up a little bit, you reduced mechanical tension on the muscle. That's not increasing it, that's reducing it. The biggest problem of what he said, though, had to do with the rest times. And I'm going to talk about the research on that first, and we're going to talk about just the common sense with it of how shortening rest times contradicts his other points. In other words, he's saying, well, sometimes in order to get the final sets, let's say you're going to do 225 on the bench press for 8 reps, right? And it's really tough to get that 8th rep. You might have to you might get the second set, you might grind out 225 for the 8. And then you might have to drop all the way down to 205 for your final set of 8. You guys see the problem with that? Because he's saying cut the rest times down. And again, made the differentiation that, well, you know, if you're a powerlifter, you might want 3 to 5 minutes. But if you're bodybuilding, you want a shorter rest time for better metabolic fatigue. No, that's not going to work. We have studies on that. And the studies, and look at Dr. Brad Schoenfeld's studies on rest times and hypertrophy. We don't even need to get into strength training. We don't need to talk about powerlifting 1 rep maxes. Look at purely the studies on hypertrophy. What did he find? Longer rest times produce more hypertrophy. Longer rest times produced more hypertrophy consistently in his studies. The explanation, because it allowed you to use more weight on the later sets. In other words, if you come in and you bench press, the number of tons that you move with the same form and the same range of motion is what's going to determine how much muscle you gain in your pecs and your triceps as a result of it. In other words, the total tonnage that you move. So in other words, if you cut down to 90 seconds, let's say you do your first set, you get 8 reps of 225, but you only rest 90 seconds like Scott is talking about, and you have to cut down to 215 for the next set to get 8, right? You just lost muscle growth. Because number one, you reduced mechanical tension. You had to reduce mechanical tension on the second set. Then you go to the third set, and you have to drop down to 205 to get 8. You reduced mechanical tension again. Well, what's the other problem? You moved 10% less total weight. You reduced the total work that you did. You reduced the total amount of volume that you did. So by reducing the mechanical tension with the shorter rest times, the amount of work that you did over your 3 sets got reduced. So you reduced mechanical tension, big factor in muscle growth, and you reduced the volume. Because doing a set of 8 with 205 is less volume than doing a set of 8 with 225. And if you don't believe that that matters, go look at the studies. We find that if you take such a short break that you have to reduce weight on later sets, they gained less muscle. The people in those groups gained less muscle. Guys who took 60 and 90-second breaks between their sets and had to reduce weight gained less muscle than the people who took 3 minutes and used the same weight every single time, those people all gained more muscle in the studies because they had more volume, they had more mechanical tension, and they did more workload. Thus, they created more metabolic fatigue. Incidentally, having more weight on the bar also improves your strength gains. So again, kind of comes back to the point of what we find more and more, you cannot separate size and strength in people who aren't on drugs. You can bias your training slightly towards more strength. You can do that by doing lower reps. But here's the kicker. What we've also found is that people who drop all the way down to sets of 3, instead of, say, sets of 10, there have been studies on this, and they take really long breaks so that they can complete the same number of tons with, say, 7 sets of 3 versus groups who do 3 sets of 10. They gain just as much muscle, but they gain more strength. It's also a little harder to recover from. But the whole point here is that he made these good points about metabolic fatigue, these great points about mechanical tension, these great points about volume, and then gives advice at the start of the video that will reduce all 3. The shorter rest times reduce all 3 of those things, and the studies have shown pretty consistently at this point, modern studies that are done with DEXA scans and muscle biopsies are showing that shorter rest times produce less muscle growth. So it turns out all the strength and conditioning coaches and the power lifters and all these strength athletes were actually right. And they have to be right, because if they don't gain more muscle, they don't get stronger. That's the reality of it. And I feel like Scott really dropped the ball on this, because he took these pieces of information that were vital. These are valuable pieces of information for gaining muscle mass. And everyone who trains needs to gain muscle. I don't care if you're a bodybuilder, men's physique competitor, a power lifter, a strongman competitor, a football player. If you're in the weight room, you're there to gain muscle. You are trying to stimulate muscle growth, because muscle growth is where you get most of your performance and your strength in the long term. Bigger muscle's a stronger muscle. Everyone's there to gain muscle. But the reality is, we know now that shorter breaks produce more muscle growth. They produce more hypertrophy, not shorter breaks. Longer breaks. Longer breaks. And again, I feel like Scott kind of dropped the ball on this one with that, because his advice actually contradicted all of his 3 points, and it contradicted the actual science on it. You should probably go back, remake the video, and say, take longer breaks, guys. You'll get bigger faster. Spend more time in the gym, but you're going to get more cock diesel. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.